Hello. For about a year or so now, I've been thinking I'd like to try playing around with some high altitude balloon stuff, and I thought I'd start off by making a little mini weather balloon that didn't cost too much. And I finally got off my ass and started to do something about it recently. I'd like to do something a little bit more interesting with balloons in the future, but I thought something that's a little bit simpler would be better to start with, something cheaper as well. It's ended up being a little bit more complex than I had originally planned for, but it was quite fun nonetheless to do it. So what am I holding this box here for? So this is my payload thing that will go on the balloon, and as you can see here, it's just sort of the top part of a RunCam box. Well, I'm sure you all know how big these are, but inside here, believe it or not, we have an Arduino Pro Mini, a GPS module, two temperature sensors, two barometers, a humidity sensor, accelerometer, a GSM cell phone network module, NRF24 radio transceiver, SD card reader, voltage regulator, that's just two resistors really. Sorry, no, voltage divider is just the two resistors, and there's a voltage regulator to step the voltage down to 3.3 volts. There's a little buzzer, and there's also an LED. All in here. Pretty neat, hey? So let's have a look at that. Aha! I lied. This is just the PCB that I made. I discovered a website called, I think it's JLC PCB or JLPCB or something like that, and it's really, really good. If you can believe it, I made this board and submitted it for manufacture within 4 hours of discovering that that software existed. And it's all online, so you don't need to install anything, and you can just run it on whatever Windows or Mac or whatever you have. Actually, I lied again because I made a bit of a mistake in my first submission, so that's my first board there and my second board there, and I got 10 of them each for see, there's a bunch more there, for $2 plus $5 shipping, so for $7 I got 10 of these. Anyway, we're getting a little bit sidetracked there, and I also lied again because even when it's assembled it doesn't quite fit in here, but only because there's this big antenna that kind of sticks out the side like that. But if it wasn't for the antenna, all of those things that I mentioned before would fit in here. So I'm quite pleased that I managed to get this all done. And even though I'm not using every pin of the Arduino Pro Mini, I thought that this is actually quite a convenient little board to use, just as a project board to put things together and have, especially for I2C devices, if you want to have lots of I2C devices on your project to use. This does actually function quite well as just sort of a breakout board for the Pro Mini. So there's a few things that I didn't use, like A7 and A6 are pretty uncommonly used, but all of the rest of the things, I'm pretty much using everything except for A7, A6, and something up in here as well. Anyway, we'll look at this in a little bit more detail as we go along, I think. So let's have a look at some of those components that I just mentioned. This is a, what is this? This is a BMP 280 barometer, pressure sensor, and this is an SI7021 humidity sensor. I think that's what it was called. And they are obviously running on an I2C connection like that. This is the back of the SD card reader. I didn't take a photo of the front for some reason. Oh, I guess I was trying to take a photo of the pin names there. But you can see it's pretty small from the size of my thumb there, and this one's running on SPI. This is the temperature sensor, so I had two of these, one on the inside and one on the outside of the enclosure, just to compare the temperature difference there. And this is not I2C or anything like that. It has its own sort of a protocol, and it's quite interesting. You can put multiple of these on the same wires, so you just connect them all up in parallel essentially, so you've got ground and VCC and signal, and you can run a whole bunch of them, so it only actually takes up one pin on your Arduino for multiple temperature sensors. A very nice little idea, and we'll look at that a little bit more in future video. I mean, well, somewhere along the line we'll look at the code for this stuff, which I will give you links to and stuff. This is a voltage regulator. I actually didn't use this one because I was a little bit concerned that when things get very, very cold, because I heard that the temperature could go down to -50 or even -55 Celsius, this is, of course, And I was just sort of wondering what would happen at that temperature to this little metal tab thingy here, because this is an adjustable voltage regulator, and you adjust it by turning this with a tiny little screwdriver to get it to where you want. And I was just sort of a little bit concerned that maybe at super cold temperature this shape of this little metal tab might change a little bit, and therefore the trimming or the adjustment of the voltage that this regulator was outputting might change as well. So I opted to get one that doesn't have an adjustable thing. It's just preset to be 3.3 volts output right from the beginning. This is the cell phone module I used, SIM800L, also very small, as you can see from the size of my fingers, and also the pins give you an idea of how big it is. Yeah, so I wasted about 6 hours trying to get this thing to work because I didn't look at this little diagram closely enough. Every time I've used a SIM card in a cell phone or other cell phone modules like this for Arduino, you always put it in so that this little cut-off tab at the corner there goes in first when you slot it in, so that this will be in the deepest part of the holder. But this one, as you can see, it's the other way around, and that was the only problem that got me stuck when I wasted that 6 hours. This works quite well, fairly cheap. Most of the stuff from Banggood, of course. Oh, speaking of cheap, look at this BN220 GPS. I love these little things. They work exceptionally well. Well, that's just the front of that one. This, I actually did not use this one. This particular breakout board only has an MS5611 barometer on it, but I got a different breakout board which has one of those, and it also has an MPU 6050 accelerometer gyro chip on it as well, which is what I actually used. And this is just showing, so I used one of these and almost one of those, but the point of this photo I think was to show that the VCC, ground, SCL and SDA pins are all lined up here for these things. So it's there, there, there and there. So I made use of that fact on my custom PCB so that I could just stack these all on top of each other and they would take up as little space as possible. That's the Arduino Pro Mini. You'll need a 3.3 volt one for this. I will of course put all the code up so that you can get it and maybe try it yourself. But it is one of those projects that's pretty complicated. I will say that up front. But anyway, if you do want to do this, you'll need a 3.3 volt Arduino, and that's just the back of that, I think. And this is one of those voltage regulators that I was just mentioning that does not have an adjustable output. It's prefixed to, I think this one's 5 volts, this one, but you can get 3.3 volts and 5 volt ones of these. And as well as all that stuff, we of course cannot forget the good old NRF24L01 module, one of the high power ones like that. Well, so-called high power, it's only 100 milliwatts, but it's one of those. And I found that these work very well. And I was just using it with one of these plain old rubber ducky antennas like that, and it did a very good job. Oh, by the way, if you catch me talking in past tense about this stuff, it's because I've already done it. I've done the balloon flight and everything. It's all finished. So this is not one of those video series where I'm sort of going through it at the same time as you and saying what I'm going to do. This is one of those video series where I have a whole lot of video footage already and recorded, and I just need to edit it and upload it to YouTube. So the rest of these videos should be coming pretty quickly after this one, maybe even tomorrow perhaps. Anyway, so I also wanted to put this on. This is Runcam Swift 3 or something like that. What is it? Micro Swift 2. Well, I'm starting to lose track. And the Runcam, I think this is called DVR01. It's their little DVR recorder thingy. Quite a neat little module. Unfortunately, had a problem with this, which meant that I couldn't use it. We'll see a little bit more about that later on. And this is just a 5 volt step down regulator that was necessary to power that. Oh, just about forgot one of the most important components. I don't have them here right now, but I used these Energizer Ultimate lithium batteries. I heard that these performed very well in super cold temperatures, and they were commonly used on these high altitude balloons. So they're a little bit expensive, unfortunately, but I thought I'd be better off just making sure that everything worked. So I used the AAA instead of AA because obviously I wanted to keep everything light. Originally I thought I might be able to get away with just using 4 of them, They're 7.5 grams each. So that would have been, what, only 30 grams for the batteries. Yeah, that's right. That was my original thinking. That's why I thought I might be able to do it in 100 grams. But it turned out that I really needed 6 of them. So I stuck 6 of them together in a pack to make a 6-cell pack. And that was much more reliable in terms of keeping the voltage at a higher point, so that the regulators that were stepping it down to 5 volts for the other components that I had, and 3.3 volts, it just meant that the voltage regulators themselves would still maintain, they'd still work instead of dropping out too quickly. Anyway, they worked very well. Oh yeah, there are of course 1 or 2 other very important things that you'll need. You'll need a balloon and a parachute, unless you want your payload to just come smashing back to the ground at free fall speed. I got my balloons from randomaerospace.co.uk. They were one of the few places that were selling these smaller 100 gram size balloons, and were also offering PayPal as a payment method. So I got this 5-pack of Huoyi balloons, and that comes to about 50 New Zealand dollars. So that's about 10 New Zealand dollars per balloon, which is a pretty good price actually. I thought some of the larger balloons get pretty expensive, but that was I was quite happy to see that they didn't cost too much, which is more than I can say for the parachutes actually. These I feel should be a little bit cheaper. They're quite nice parachutes though. I just got this the smallest one that they have there. It seemed to be about right. It's made of some nice Dacron or ripstop nylon. Does it say what it is there? No. And they come in a nice bag, and yeah, they're very nice parachutes, but I feel like for what they are, they don't need to be quite that nice. They could be a little bit crappier and a little bit cheaper. I might try making something myself perhaps next time for this. Here's some specs for those components that I listed up from looking at all their data sheets, as much as I could figure out anyway. And my main concerns were the minimum operating temperature and the voltage range. Oh, and of course current, because I was once I had the 6-cell pack, I wasn't so worried about how much energy was there in total, but for 4 cells I was worried that I might not have enough energy to run for, say, you probably want it to run for about 4 or 5 hours was my thinking, because the typical balloon flight would be something like 1.5 to 2 hours. Anyway, so you can see that most of these little thingies are set or spec'd to be a minimum operating temperature of -40. And that can't be a coincidence. I wonder what exactly it is inside them that dies at below -40, but it's probably the same thing, whatever it is. Now the exception is of course this DS18B20, and that goes down to -55. Would be nice if it went a little bit further for this kind of thing, because like I say, -55 I think is actually quite feasible to encounter at some altitudes. But anyway, it seemed to work alright. Yeah, SD cards. Yeah, I've found that some SD cards are actually made specifically for lower temperatures, but they're a little bit expensive. What else do we have here? So current draw. These are the absolute maximum current draws rated for those things there, and by far the biggest one is the DVR. So it was actually kind of nice not to have that on. It was just one less thing to worry about drawing so much current, and because this is a constant current, it's always drawing that much current. A lot of these other things only draw a certain amount of current while they're actually doing something. For example, this one here. Oh yeah, I've got Maple Mini here. I thought I might actually have to move to 32-bit STM32 microcontroller, but fortunately didn't need to. But anyway, this sort of current here is the absolute maximum, but as we'll see later on, this was something that I just really didn't need to worry about. Oh, tab has crashed. So here are some general goals that I had for this project. The most important one was just to sort of get some practice at this whole ballooning thing and do it at a low cost. So that's why I had everything as compact and lightweight as I could there. I don't think I mentioned earlier, but I was aiming for 100 grams for the payload. I didn't quite make it. About 150 grams was what I ended up with, but that's still pretty good. But that means you can use a much smaller balloon, and you need less gas to put in the balloon to get it to rise. So overall, I think I've done it about as cheaply as I possibly could have, although the stuff all does add up, and especially when you add up the cost of the helium, by God, that stuff is expensive. So yeah, simple launch with low cost, and also just to become familiar with things that I didn't know much about, like where do you even buy helium from? Like I had no idea. Yeah, just to sort of increase my general knowledge about the whole ballooning thing was the main goal. But to be a little bit more specific about some other things that I was curious about, I wanted to see how well these sensors all worked at low temperature. They were all spec'd to work, as we'll see in the next little bit. I'll show you some specs for them. It seems like most of the stuff is spec'd to work down to -40, and the outside temperature I was expecting, like I said, to be -50 to -55, something like that, but I was really hoping that the internal temperature would not go below -40, because otherwise some of these sensors might actually stop. But anyway, that was one thing I was curious about. I also wanted to check that the GPS worked at high altitude, cold temperature as well, of course, but it seems like it used to be back in the day that a lot of the GPSs that people used for this, they actually didn't work over a certain altitude. But these days, most of the U-Box ones seem to work up to about 50 kilometers, which is way higher than any of balloons can get, I think. So that wasn't such a concern, but all the same, I did want to make sure that it was going to work. And of course, we're calling it a weather balloon, so we should be measuring the temperature and humidity and stuff at different altitudes. I was also curious to see what difference there was between the GPS reported altitude and the pressure altitude that the two barometers were giving. I wanted to see how quickly it went up and came down. I wanted to see how feasible it was to use the NRF24 modules for tracking, basically just how well the signal was received at long range. I have a pretty good idea, or at least I thought I had a pretty good idea of what to expect for this, but my expectations were far exceeded, as we'll see as we go along. I wanted to test the feasibility of GSM for tracking. Now, the cell phone network is, of course, mainly supposed to be only a terrestrial network, so the antennas are all pointed sideways. They don't point up in the sky. And I had heard that you don't get any signal over about 3 kilometers altitude anyway, so I wasn't expecting too much from this. But this one actually underperformed, as we'll see. I wanted to test the effectiveness of the enclosure that I made, and I wanted to see how much the battery sort of sagged at low temperatures. And bottom on the list is to record some video. Like I showed you, I was just going to put the little FPV camera on. Nothing amazing, like this is the bottom of my priorities. Here's an outline of how the transmission is handled between the balloon and the ground. The NRF24 on the balloon transmits to the one on the ground, which is connected to an Android tablet by a FTDI adapter and a USB on the go cable. And this transmission is done quite fast. It's a bit tricky to say exactly what the average would be, because as we'll see when we look at the source code a bit later on, there's a lot of things going on in this very busy little Arduino Pro Mini's brain, and it's kind of stretched to the limit, so it actually has to stop doing certain things, and it has to sort of spread the load out over time as much as it can. So on some occasions this NRF24 is actually not transmitting anything at all, so it goes down to 0 sometimes, and it goes up to about 90 packets per second at the quickest times. So let's just say dozens to give it about an average. There is an SD card writer, as we saw, on board, and that is writing to a log file, and that means that when the payload is recovered, if we recover it, we can see a full record of all the data, regardless of how well any of these transmissions worked. Then the cell phone module is also transmitting. This is using the internet to post a request to my web server, and the web server will store this data in a MySQL database on the server, and this is done once every 25 seconds. It just tends to be a little bit slow, this one. It can't really do, it could probably go a little bit faster, I think, but just not so as not to push it. I thought I'd make sure that it had enough time to finish the last one before I tried to get it to do something else. So once every 25 seconds seems to be a safe rate to go for that one. And then to look at that info on the Android app, the Android app is, or the tablet is also, of course, connected to the internet as well. So this is just going to look at that data and keep refreshing it from my web server. And finally, on the Android app, there's also some logging going on to a local storage file on the tablet or the phone. And this is just in case that the balloon could not be found, and you wouldn't have that log file, right, if you can't find the balloon where it went. So this at least would show you what you were able to record from the radio transmissions from these two things as best it could. So in case it wasn't obvious, the reason for having two separate radio transmission methods is in case one of them doesn't work. But I also like the fact that these two are quite well balanced in terms of strengths and weaknesses. For example, the NRF24, you need to be fairly near it, sort of within a few kilometers or tens of kilometers as it turned out. But the payoff is that it's very, very fast transmission, like I said, dozens of packets per second. So it's really nice to look at the Android app on the map there and see the little dot moving around as the balloon goes overhead and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. Whereas on the other hand, the GSM talks to cell phone towers, so I don't actually need to be anywhere near this thing for it to be correctly recording data, and it also records permanent storage onto my web server as well, so I'm not going to miss anything by not being in radio contact with it at any particular time. The weaknesses are, of course, it's a little bit slower, and it doesn't work over about 3 kilometers, or as I found out, over about 1 kilometer actually. Yeah, so they both sort of have a good balance there. Okay, I think I'll just leave it there for this video. That should be enough of an intro to what it's all about, and we're probably over 20 minutes already. Like I say, all of the video, or almost all of the video that we'll see in the next parts of the series are already recorded, so all I have to do is edit them together and they should be up pretty soon. Oh, except for, actually in the next video we're going to dive in and look at the details of the main sketch that's running on the balloon itself, the source code of it, that is. So you might want to prepare 5 or 6 pots of very strong coffee if you want to watch that one. Otherwise, maybe just skip to part 3 when that goes up. Anyway, thanks for watching part 1. See you next time.